Morning. Sorry, I know it looks a little formal, sort of right. It is the 15th of April, and we are commencing with the interviews for the Commissioner for Children. I am Benedicta van Minnen. I am the chair of this committee, and I'll be chairing the process. It is an hour, so it's 10 minutes for your presentation, which I see you have submitted, and then it's 45 minutes. We will have 10 questions, so just bear the time in mind. Also, I will introduce everybody now. I just want to cover the base that this is being broadcast on parliamentary YouTube because it's a standing committee of the Western Cape Provincial Parliament. And obviously we want to be as transparent as possible to everybody. So as I say, I'm Benedicta van Minnen. I'm just going to introduce, starting here.
Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, honourable members and chairperson. My name is Wendy Kaiser-Philander and I'm a member of this committee.
Good morning all. I'm Leon van Wyk. I'm a member of this committee.
I'm Thomas Walters. I'm a member of this committee.
Good morning, Chair and all members. I'm Donita Stevens and I'm a member of this committee.
Morning, Chairperson. I'm Khalid Sayed, member of the committee.
Good morning. I'm Brett Heron, member of the committee.
So then we can just give you a couple of minutes to introduce yourself, and then when you're ready, you can take us through your presentation, and then we can commence with the questions. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for honouring me with this opportunity. My name is Patricia Martin-Wessner. I am a Western Cape sort of original. Born and lived in the Western Cape for all of my life. And I think that the simplest way to introduce myself is that I'm a lifelong child rights advocate. You'll get to know me better during the course of the interview, so I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time. You've all seen my CV. You have the practical details about me. I hope to share a little bit more about myself personally today.
Thank you very much. And would you like to then please take us through your presentation? I believe the slides are loaded.
Okay, thank you. Is there a clicker or a... Okay, it's just that they are a little animated, so it's going to be a little bit... Can
you play? Can you maybe do it on play, or what will work for you?
I think that's going to be the easiest. I can also then just paste the...
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Also, just presenting things so that it can be.
Is it going to appear?
No, we're actually too far from the table.
Oh, we're too far from the table.
Yeah. So don't do this. Just do it this way. And I'm likely to actually present through the PowerPoint presentation actually. Yeah. Do Teams. You just do it on the slideshow and
okay. Okay, so I trust you can all see the slides on YouTube or on your computers. Is everybody?
Well, I know we've got them on paper.
Okay, all right. Okay, apologies for, I just made an assumption.
It's fine, don't worry.
That I'd be able to click from where I was sitting. Okay, so it is animated just to kind of break it down a little bit. So unfortunately with the paper, you'll just have to follow. So the presentation is very brief. Just in terms of the vision of the role of the Commissioner. Sorry. So with the Commissioner on Children's Rights, really it seems a little bit, it was a little bit of a sort of, I just felt a little bit arrogant sort of coming up with a vision. But based on my experience and working with other human rights commissioners, child rights commissioners, it's a very unique position, which allows for a very comprehensive and holistic leadership role. So the way I really see this role and similar roles in South Africa and across the globe is that a commissioner really plays the role of the custodian of a unifying rights-based development vision, which is linked to improved outcomes for children in the Western Cape. It's not just about rights, it's not just about children, it is about that comprehensive agenda that is linked to the vision of the Western Cape, which originates from multiple sources, but it comes together in a unifying vision for children. It is definitely grounded in our treaty, constitutional policy, legislative and sustainable development commitments and goals. And the commissioner then is a catalyst, an advocate, a driver, an enabler, and a monitor of systemic change by all responsible role players to advance that commission, and against which we all hold ourselves accountable. And that is across the continuum, across the caregiving, the governance continuum. So with respect to government, across all branches and agencies, in terms of non-government organizations, community and faith-based organizations, service providers, and that would include your government service providers, as well as your business and your media, parents and caregivers, and then critically children themselves. And really to be the role of the commissioner, as I said, is the custodian of this, and then to fulfill these various roles that I've mentioned, to ensure that across this continuum, there's a recognition, a common recognition and collective action to advance that vision through realization of interdependent and indivisible rights of all children in the province, so that they may not only survive, but be protected, develop and exercise their full potential. And ultimately, that vision is an accountability mechanism which is rights and development based. And at the end of the day, it is about accountability. There's a lot of support that goes into it, and hence the term custodian, a very kind of, a supportive, but an accountability role as well. Taking a step forward from that, then what are the core functions? It is definitely a very high-level function, a holistic function of provincial child rights leadership, monitoring, support, and oversight of that unifying child rights vision. I speak about a unifying child rights vision. It's something that's very difficult to articulate if you're working in a specific isolated space, whereas with a commissioner, with this holistic overview, a critical function and a foundational function would be supporting the framing of that rights-based development division and the goals that are aligned to it and that are aligned to our provincial priorities, and linked to that, articulating the theory of change. How does this all fit together? And then engage in advocacy, capacity building, your different sort of technical support roles to support province-wide recognition and prioritization of that vision, and secure a shared operational understanding of what is required to achieve it. And very briefly, I mean, what is required to achieve it, and this is where the uniqueness comes in, is that there's a clear formula for realizing that, and that is where the theory of change comes in. It's realization of children's interdependent and indivisible rights through a provincial system of services and support in the required combinations. And we'll speak a little bit about that, and probably during the interview a little bit more. And it's to support then the responsible role players across this caregiving and governance continuum to fulfill their commitments through education, information sharing, technical advice and guidance. And on the right-hand side, you have the diagram, which really shows that. It runs right from global down to regional, to national, community, and ultimately to the level of the child. And the flip side of the vision is monitoring. we need a vision. We need something around which we can cohere, around which we can galvanize collective efforts, align our efforts to achieve that vision. We need to have clear understanding of what the pathways to realizing that vision are, what our roles and responsibilities are. But critically, this is a right. This is an issue of rights and development. It's all about accountability. So what we really need is we need a monitoring, reporting, and follow-up framework, which is integrated into existing systems that's aligned to that vision. And articulating that overarching monitoring, reporting, and follow-up framework is absolutely critical. I'll talk a little bit about that more. It's not just about monitoring. It's about monitoring for the purposes of collecting data to be able to tell the story of children in the Western Cape, but also to change the story of children in the Western Cape. And that's critically the role of the Commission. It's to provide that kind of kind of continuing system strengthening catalytic sort of role. So critically, one of the most important functions, I think, is meaningful and ongoing analytical monitoring of outcomes of children. Monitoring the realization of their rights necessary for those outcomes, and then what the correlating systemic enablers are that are not in place, so that we can understand why we are seeing poor outcomes and why we are seeing good outcomes. And monitoring is not just about data collection at a sort of survey level or at a research level, but of course the investigative role, as well as researching into particular child rights issues would complement that. So that is critically part of that overarching monitoring, reporting, and follow-up process. And then critically, I think this is the most important because we often monitor. I see a lot of monitoring across the globe, but we don't use the data. So what we really need to see, and I think the Commissioner, the Office of the Commissioner in the Western Cape is uniquely positioned to do this, is to establish what the Office of the High Commission on Human Rights really recommends, and that's to have a monitoring, reporting, and follow-up framework that is integrated into governance systems. Not just within government, but the system across these caregiving continuums, so that we have a systematic mechanism for not just the publication, but the use of that data and the results that come out of that data to continually strengthen systems for children. And that requires integration, very close interface between this monitoring framework and governance systems and the governance cycle. And that is why the Western Cape Commissioner is so uniquely positioned, because it sits kind of in the middle of this web, this network, which is the childcare and protection system in the Western Cape. So those would really be the core functions. In terms of priorities, this is a really tricky question. So I'm going to speak from the heart here. I think we need to be careful of prioritizing at a granular level. I think we need to place our focus on improved outcomes for children, measured against treaty, constitutional, and policy commitments. When we look at what we have actually committed for children, it's to ensure that they don't just survive, but that they are protected, that they are safe, that they develop their full potential, and that they have the opportunity to exercise that potential, that they have the agency. That should be our shared priority as a province. Every child in the Western Cape should not just survive, not just be protected, but develop and exercise their full potential. As I mentioned when I opened my presentation, to achieve those outcomes, we need to realize the indivisible rights. When we look at our constitution, when we look at the treaty obligations, rights are indivisible, they're interdependent. All of these must be realized in combination to secure these outcomes. And in order to do that, we need to create enabling environments across the caregiving continuum. To achieve this, we need a provincial system of enabling laws, coordinated planning, resourcing, and provisioning, which is critical. So the system to achieve the outcome really is, I look at it from a macro point of view, from a system strengthening point of view. If we have that in place, we will, through a process of analysis, get to that point where we understand what the priorities are in a particular context, because they differ. We're not just going to say, well, education, we know education is important. And one of the challenges is, and I just want to highlight this, is we need to understand outcomes. We need to be measuring outcomes in order to build our inclusive human capital to achieve transformation. And that's the only way we're going to routinely realize children's rights in future generations. And when we look at what's happened in South Africa and in the provinces, when we look at the budgets, there's been a lot of focus on education. And I'm not saying education is not absolutely critical, but education on its own does not secure these outcomes that we're seeing. It has to be all the rights that have been realized, but our systems are not strong enough. So if we look at measurements of outcomes for children in the Western Cape, they're better in some respects. Nationally, when we look at education and health, those have received the biggest slices of the budget. Social Security has received the biggest slice of the budget. When we look at measuring outcomes, those budgets have increased over the last decade substantially. Nationally, so regionally, we are much higher than other comparable countries. But our human capital index, which measures the extent to which children's potential is developed at population scale, has not changed in 10 years. It's measured by the World Bank on a scale of 0 to 1. 0 being no development, 1 being full development potential at a population scale. We sit at just over 0.4, and that hasn't changed since 10 years ago, okay? And it's deeply inequitable. So when we look at those outcomes, if we just keep on doing more of the same, we are going to just perpetuate the problem. We have these very high NEET rates, and that then creates this intergenerational pattern. Young women tend to be excluded, and they are the caregivers of the future, and the cycle then continues. So hence the focus on outcomes, because we need to unravel the picture behind it. And this should then inform the Commissioner's strategic framework of priorities. And this means that the current strategy that is in place, and we can talk about that, may need to be revised in terms of what is happening in the Commissioner's office, and especially given that we have a new 7th administration and new medium-term development plan, because ultimately all of this has to be actioned through governance cycles. There has to be synchronicity. Okay, in terms of essential qualities and competencies,
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to ask you to start finishing up. I have given you a couple of extra
Okay, no
minutes. We
problem.
started a bit late.
Okay, no problem. Okay, it's independence, impartiality, and credibility, being able to see and understand the bigger picture and action change within that bigger picture, having an applied knowledge of child-centered rights-based development and child rights governance, knowing what the responsibilities are and how these are to be executed by the different role players. Critically, this is an issue of rights. Legal knowledge is imperative, and critically, public law, administrative law, human rights law, international law. And an in-depth understanding of the status of children's outcomes and rights in the country, analytical skills, advocacy and communications, networking and facilitation skills amongst a range of role players, and recognition of children as rights holders and agents of change who have the capacity to enable their meaningful engagement as agents of change, and have the capacity to enable them, and tenacity. I think that is one thing I've learned in my 20 years. We need tenacity. In terms of the strategies, the first is to build a shared unifying provincial vision that all role players recognize, that enjoys high-level political leadership. Build a platform grounded in unity of purpose, which grounds a provincial childcare and protection system. Strengthen that network of capable child rights champions of change across the network of governmental and non-governmental role players. Develop and institutionalize a provincial child rights monitoring, reporting, and follow-up framework across existing platforms and structures that are already well developed in the Western Cape. Develop a strategy and implementation plan responding to monitoring outcomes, and engage in diverse monitoring approaches, and engage in sustained inclusive engagement across the child rights governance cycle to remedy underlying causes and improve those outcomes. And that really is the governance cycle, which is in that diagram on the right, and that's at a global, regional, national, provincial, and local level. And critically continue the work done by the current Commission enabling child-led engagement across that governance cycle. So thank you. Sorry, I rushed that last one a little bit.
Thank you very much. Okay. Okay, are you sorted out with the laptop? Okay, great. Right, now we have, the format is 10 questions, so we'll just have to manage the time. And I will then hand over to the first person, which is Member Heron.
The first question is, what value does your previous job experience add to the role of the Children's Commissioner?
So as you'll have seen from my CV, I am a consultant. And for the last 15 years, I have had many jobs, but all of them have been in the area of child rights. And I have worked across that continuum of spaces in terms of child rights system strengthening. I have worked from the research perspective, policy analysis, policy development, advocacy strategy development, advocating directly, developing implementation plans, capacity building, monitoring, evaluation. And that is really, I think, where the real value comes, is that obviously I have a law degree, I have a master's in law and human rights law, I have my administrative law background, my public law background, but I have become deeply familiar with the rights-based development framework and how that is operationalized, and supported diversity of organizations from kind of treaty body level right down to the small community-based organizational level, understand what the implications of those are, what the responsibilities are, not just what the commitments are, but how to execute those, and what successful execution looks like from a holistic perspective. And not just produce documents, but taken that as action research to inform systems change planning, recommendations, and accountability processes, engaging in accountability processes. Part of that has been working with children directly as well. I have spent a lot of time in terms of research, in terms of gauging and supporting children be an active part of this broader system. And I think it's just having worked within a system strengthening framework, I have the knowledge, the expertise, but the perspective from these different role players, which allows me to bring very holistic and operational understanding, which is, I think, something that a commissioner's office really needs, is how to execute the next step to continually improve outcomes for children.
Member Kaiser Philander.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, Ms. Martin Wissner. My question to you, and in your view and according to you, what are the 3 biggest challenges that children are faced with in the Western Cape? And how will you, as the Commissioner for Children, approach those issues?
The 3 biggest issues for children in the Western Cape. The biggest issue is the nurturing care deficit in the caregiving environments across the caregiving continuum for children. We know what children need to realize their rights. We know what they need in order to develop and exercise their full potential. They need all of their interdependent rights realized. As children, they depend on role players, caregivers across a caregiving continuum. And there used to be consistency of high quality caregiving across essentially 5 domains. The science has become very clear around what they need. And this nurturing care framework is really wonderful. It really tells us it's very basic. They need health and nutrition. They need responsive caregiving, which is that interactive nurturing care. They need education, quality education and stimulation from birth. And then they need protection and security, which is your basic services and safety. And they need that across the continuum. They need it in their homes, critically where parents are the primary providers, but there has to be continuity. When they go into a clinic, when they go into an ECD center, when they go into school, when they're going online, there has to be that continuity. That network of nurturing care and support has got large holes in it in the Western Cape. Not just in the Western Cape. The Western Cape, there's a specific set of reasons behind that. Socioeconomic, substance abuse, poverty is a main issue, and inequality of opportunity, the failure of previous generations to have caught up. So really strengthening those nurturing environments is really the most important strategic measure that needs to take place. And this is the kind of the holistic picture that one has to bring to it. And this is why, a child that lives in the Overberg is going to have different risk factors than a child that lives in the metro. So it's very difficult to then go down at that micro level. That's why I like to say, let us look at what we need to address that nurturing care deficit. We need data. So in terms of the systems, sort of online, sort of live data to really allow us to understand, to allow and to have political leadership and commitment to addressing that. That I think is one of the biggest priorities. If we have that, the rest will fall into place. So I know it's a little bit of a roundabout way, but as I said, I don't want to say education. Education is critically important, but it's no more important than having loving parents who are not experiencing extreme poverty at home, because it negates the impact of your individual rights.
Thank you very much. Member Syed.
Thank you very much. And I think this flows from the previous responses. How do you propose to translate the identified community concerns into practical solutions within the constraints of limited resources?
The answer to that is quite simple. We just have to work with the existing system. It's not about creating a parallel system. We have a system of governance, a very well-developed system of governance in the Western Cape, and I showed you that cycle. I'm sorry that I had to rush through it. It's the governance cycle, which starts with your policy development, moves on to your prioritization, program development, resource allocation, human resources development, monitoring, and ultimately your follow-up. And that, as you know, runs across your annual and 5-yearly planning cycles. It's critical that we have a mechanism that bridges the governance cycle and what is happening at the different levels, at the level of the child, at the level of the community, at the level of the school. So having monitoring, having up-to-date monitoring that is aligned to our vision, our framework, ensuring that we have an analytical monitoring framework whereby we understand what the situation is of children, but the role of the Commission is really to understand analytically and articulate the underlying systemic disenablers, and engage in advocacy, engage in capacity building, engage in technical support, guidance and advice across that governance cycle, because that is the critical point where those enablers are strengthened to address those. So it is about ensuring that we have an integrated child rights governance system. I think that would be my kind of global answer.
Member Stevens?
My question to you, given that monitoring and reporting are the aspects of the Commissioner, how would you go about in raising awareness to the departments and executive? What monitoring tools will be implemented? How would you manage a situation where government departments or the executive do not want to cooperate with the office of the Commissioner? Thank you.
Goes back to my question of having a shared vision. And which is why it's really tricky to focus in on only specific rights. Because if we talk about rights and we're talking to trade and industry or the business sector, they'll say, well, that's not our domain. It really is critical that as a province, we understand the rights-based development agenda and understand that realizing these outcomes for children is a legal commitment, but critically, it is the heart, the essence of a prosperous Western Cape, of achieving those sustainable development goals. And critically, through the Premier's office, we need leadership. We need leadership of children's development as a provincial development rights-based priority. But in order to make that real, we need to have a vision. We need to have clearly understood outcomes, and all role players need to be able to relate to that outcome. It's about the relevance of that vision. So crafting that vision and ideally getting that integrated into the governance framework, that it's in the provincial development plan, that it's in the provincial monitoring framework. So we're not having parallel systems, so that it becomes a routine part of our execution, our implementation responsibilities in order to achieve the provincial development outcomes, and there are routine monitoring of data. The Commissioner's role is to guide the identification of those outcomes, to guide the identification of the indicators, and really advocate for that to be integrated. So that once again, we're not looking at having separate monitoring systems. And if it's integrated into the governance system, then there's the routine process of annual reflection, especially through the parliamentary processes. Reviewing annual performance plans, reviewing budgets, reviewing performance against that monitoring framework, and then holding government accountable. So critically having parliamentary commitment and buy-in to that is absolutely essential. And then, of course, we talk about treaty reporting, but that's a sort of a much longer-term reporting process, and it doesn't have as direct an impact, but it is a critical enabler as well. So yes, integration, system strengthening, but around a unifying vision that is rights-based.
Thank you very much. Member van Wyk.
How would you ensure the Children's Act is implemented on the ground to benefit children? And if you could give us a practical example.
Well, firstly, I try and make sure that it's actually promulgated, the amendment, because that has taken very long and it's delayed a lot of innovation. So the Children's Act is huge. And I think it has to, it's not just about implementing the Children's Act, but about implementing the specific legal commitments that have not yet been implemented. We have to look at it strategically, identify what is in fact not being implemented through a process of monitoring. Now, one of the areas, I'll use an example because I think that's an ongoing process. Implementation is a continuum and it's a continuous process of review, reflection, and strengthening. But a very long-standing problem, and I know that this was dealt with last year, in fact, and is ongoing at the moment, is the Children's Act was developed before the Child Care and Protection Policy. The Child Care and Protection Policy was then developed afterwards. I was part of that process of development of that policy. And I think we need to go back to the policy because that provides the overarching commitment. What are the outcomes that we've committed to achieve? And it is to implement or develop a developmental child care and protection system, which focuses on assets, strengthening nurturing environments, building capacity so that children's caregivers across that caregiving continuum have the necessary resources so that they can fulfill their responsibilities to children. And the idea is that we really promote that enabling environment. And where there are risks and adversities, we have prevention and early intervention services that are then targeted, address those problems so that, you all know, familiar with that pyramid of services, so that ultimately what we have is we have a very small group of children that need to go through high intensity statutory care. The challenge is, so the developmental child care and protection system says we need to invest significantly more resources in that systemic network of supportive services at the bottom. And we often, I think in this country, we haven't fulfilled that obligation. So it's about that overarching obligation. How do we strengthen that network of promotive services, identification of families and children at risk, and providing them with prevention and early intervention services? When we look at our budgets and we look at the priorities that are coming through nationally and provincially, we are still seeing a lot going to the statutory services. We're seeing a lot of effort put into kind of strengthening the foster care system, addressing foster care backlogs. And just by way of example, I sort of was reading a report from the Department of Social Development in the Western Cape, which is committed to this developmental approach, but is still facing a situation where there has been a massive increase in the number of children placed into foster care in the last 3 years. That should not be happening in a healthy system. And the reason given by the Department of Social Development, especially in the kind of the Overberg region, it's because of social and economic challenges that parents face. The UN guidelines on alternative care indicate that children should not be removed from their families and placed in foster care because of that. We need to have systems to support families. But because we're seeing this dramatic growth, funds have to then go to that because you've got this immediate problem. We need to start changing that balance. We need to start getting that balance in place, and that will start moving us towards better implementation of the Children's Act. It'll start alleviating the pressure on the statutory system, and it'll start promoting better enabling environments, will reduce that nurturing care deficit that we're seeing at the moment. But it is about political will and resource allocation. So it's advocacy and evidence.
How would you defend the integrity of the Children's Commissioner, and how would you protect the functional independence of the Commissioner?
By remaining independent, impartial, and guided by law and evidence. I'm not sure how, how else to answer that, but effectively to remain true to the principles, and to remain impartial, and ensuring that the accountability role of the Commissioner remains well protected. Because I think that's one of the real challenges, especially where we have a systemic approach. The Commissioner is part of the system. So you're part of a system, but you have to oversee that system at the same time. And that's where the challenge comes in. But by maintaining and reverting back to the legal principles, ensuring that you have your vision, your framework of accountability, and you stay true to that. And ensuring that other role players are free and have the power and the capacity to monitor the Commissioner, and to be free to call out if there is any perceived bias. It is a systemic balance that one would have to achieve.
Thank you. Member Heron?
Thank you. I think in your presentation, you mentioned the current Commissioner's engagement model. So the panel's question is in two parts. As the Commissioner for Children, how do you view the Child Monitor program? If you were to change it, how would you involve child government monitors and children sectors? That's the first part. And then B, how will you ensure that initiatives like the child government monitors incorporate children's voices and their perspectives are integrated into your work and decision-making process on a municipal or government level? Do you need me to repeat that? It's quite long.
It is quite a lot. So if you just as I recall, so what do I think of the current child monitoring program?
And if you were to change it, how would you involve child monitors? That's okay. The first part.
All right. So I think it's an incredible initiative. And I think it needs to be built on. I think it could be strengthened. I think children need to be seen as part of the system, supported by other role players in the system and in dialogue with other role players in the system. And that's from the global right down to the local level. And it's about integrating their voices across that governance continuum so that there are clear mechanisms across that continuum in the terms of development of policy, in terms of budget allocations, in terms of program development, in terms of the parliamentary oversight role, not just the treaty body oversight role, and in terms of reporting and making recommendations for strengthening. Bring that in a more systemic way through the development of a coherent implementation plan. It would be very difficult to come up with a very detailed answer to that question right now. I don't know enough about how it operates in practice, but really identifying where those entry points are and how it can link up with existing structures and architecture. So we've got the Children's Parliament, we've got sort of local government, sort of children's ambassadors at local government level. How do all these pieces fit together? And how do we create that interface? So, and I must say, I don't enjoy, or I don't value the term participation, because participation suggests somebody comes in and comes out. It's about meaningful engagement, that they are consistent and a sustained part of that cycle, of that system. And as I say, I think it'll take a sort of a reflection process. What is currently happening? Where are the opportunities that we could capitalize on that perhaps weren't available when the program was started, and how can we strengthen it? Sorry, and the second part of the
The second part was, how would you ensure that initiatives like the Child Government Monitors incorporate children's voices and their perspectives are integrated into your work decision-making process on a municipal government level, which I think you may have touched on.
I think the answer pretty much covers all of that.
Thanks very much. Member Kaiser Fernanda.
Thank you very much, Chair. My next question, given the high levels of child trafficking in the Western Cape, how would you propose the Office of the Commissioner for Children would seek to address that issue?
By strengthening the child protection system, the child care and protection system. It cannot be done in a piecemeal fashion. It's got to be done systemically. Identify where the systemic gaps are. We have good legislation. We have good policies. But where are we breaking down in terms of the programs, really working through our data to understand what the causes are, and then working through the various functions across that kind of governance continuum. So, identifying where the challenges are, and this is with any challenge, not just trafficking, any of the challenges. At the level of the child, what are the challenges? At the level of the family, what are the challenges in relation to their responsibilities? Using our monitoring framework, what are their responsibilities? Where are the challenges? Where are they not fulfilling those responsibilities? What are the causes? But then at a community level, what is driving it? At a provincial level, what is driving that? At a governance level and at a national level. And then devising a system strengthening strategy, which would involve strengthening our laws, strengthening our policies, increasing our programs, education, awareness raising, and any problem that is raised will have the same formula that we respond to. But the evidence that we use and the legal framework that we use will then be customized. And that's critically where the Commissioner comes in, because the Commissioner has the space, the knowledge, the resources to really focus on one issue at a time and then interface to ensure that the responses are actioned and executed by the different role players.
Thank you. Member Syed. Question 9.
Thank you very much, Chair. My question is, what steps would you take as a Commissioner for Children to address the lack of forensic support in sexual and child abuse cases? And can you provide an example of similar initiatives that you've led or which you have supported in the past to improve response and support for victims? Thank you.
That's a very, very operational question. It doesn't differ in any way to any of the other answers. It's all about strengthening the system. So why? I mean, there's a clear obligation to provide that forensic services. So it would be about firstly understanding what the scope of those responsibilities are and who the role players are that are responsible for delivering on those functions. Identifying where those functions are not being fulfilled and what the reasons are. And then developing a strategic plan to address those. Is it because there are insufficient human resources, which is very often the case, and often it's a case of budgets not being available. And then it's a case of working with economists, working with your social scientists to develop the evidence, to put together your sort of advocacy argument, and engage through the governance system for increased allocations. Where those allocations are not increased or where capacity is not increased, then use accountability mechanisms, using Parliament as an accountability mechanism, using the treaty bodies as accountability mechanisms. So, as I said, it is very much a case. In terms of a practical example, around child protection specifically, I can't think of one specifically, but for example, around ECD, there's been this very big movement around increasing the recognition of early development as a priority and ensuring that resources are actually allocated to strengthening early childhood development programs, That is something that I've worked on right back from when we did a diagnostic. There was a collective team, a multidisciplinary team that really approached it scientifically in a rights and evidence-based framework. Looked at what was the causes of poor programming, early childhood development programming, identify those, and we had a multidisciplinary team. And with any of these, it wouldn't just be the commissioner, it would be harnessing the collective resources, but being the central voice piece to place the spotlight on that. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much. And then our final question is from Member Stevens.
The final question. How would you advocate and support children with special needs to access education so they can live a meaningful post-school life?
Accountability for the many legal commitments that we've made as a province and as a country. We have every piece of law that we need. We have programs in place. We have the skills, we have the capacity, but it's not adequately prioritized as a political priority, and the budget hasn't flowed. So if generally still white paper 6 is used as the guiding framework for inclusive education. It's 25 years old. It's out of touch with the evidence. It's out of touch with our resources and our governance systems. So I think from a kind of looking at it from a systemic point of view, we need to update and have perhaps something like a provincial white paper 6 that really develops, because it's an implementation plan that really looks at the rands and the cents, the resources that we have and what we actually need to do, sets new targets, and that those are then incorporated into the provincial development plan and the provincial monitoring framework. Inclusion would definitely be part of the monitoring framework, and what we'd want to see is not just improved outcomes, but reduced inequalities in those outcomes. So if we monitor regularly and hold accountable the role players for reducing the inequalities for children with disabilities, it will be profiled. But once again, it's only going to work if the monitoring framework is disaggregated by factors such as disability. We regularly collect that data, and as a collective sort of commissioner, premier, this is a provincial priority and it needs to be addressed. We will start seeing the budget flowing. As soon as you monitor, it unlocks the budget, but it depends on who's doing the monitoring. I don't think the commissioner monitoring on her own or his own is enough. I think it's got to be a complementary political process.
Thank you very much. As you know, we advertised the names to ask if there were any objections, and there were no objections to your nomination. So I don't need to ask you any questions about that. But thank you very, very much. Now, in terms of the process going forward, we obviously are doing the interviews today and tomorrow, and then we will deliberate as a committee to come up with a recommendation for the Premier. So I would say that we're probably looking at a couple of weeks, because one wants to make sure that we cross all the T's and dot all the I's. But I really want to thank you very much for coming and for the presentation and for answering the questions, as well as sitting right on the other end of the room. Thank you very much. Okay. And I think that concludes it.
Okay, well, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us. I am Benedicta van Minen. I am the chair of the standing committee. Let's just introduce the committee and then we can just talk about the process going forward. So let's start at this end with you, Member Heron.
Good morning. I'm Brett Heron, member of the committee.
Thank you, Thank you.
Good morning, Khalid Said, member of the committee.
Thanks, Thank you.
Good morning, Donita Stevens. I'm a member of the committee.
Thank you.
Thomas Walters, a member of the committee.
Thank you.
Good morning. Leon van Wyk, a member of the committee.
Good morning. My name is Wendy Kaiser-Philander and I'm a member of this committee.
Thank you. Thank you all.
I'll give you some time to introduce yourself just at the beginning and then you can present your presentation. You have got 10 minutes for that. And then if you, in terms of the slides, it's probably easiest if we have a screen behind us. Our procedural officers can just click through them when you tell her to move on, if that works for you. And then after that, we have 10 questions for a total of 45 minutes. So it's 10 minutes for the presentation, 45 minutes for the questions. So just keep an eye on time. And then also just bear in mind that this is screened on YouTube because as a standing committee of the Western Cape Provincial Parliament, it's an open meeting. So that screening will also then go out. And I think if there is nothing else, we can kick off. I think just introduce yourself and then when you're ready, go into your presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Chairperson. My name is Sikolile. The other two names, it's Quincy Delight. So for those that can't say Sikolile, you can call me with the other two names. I am currently working on gender-based violence and helping on that. I come from a long history of working in human rights. So I hope you will enable me to just present myself and thank you for the invitation. Really, it's much appreciated. For a person like me, it's a full cycle because back in 1992, I was one of the 200 children that came to the Western Cape to draft the then Children's Charter, which is now the Children's Act. And my very first job was supporting the mayor of Howick, Umgeni, to do what was called then the protocol on child neglect and abuse. So that was my first job. And it was seconded by Childline. It's a DSD. So it was a nice civil society government partnership, which are things that we don't see most often. And for me, that was really the grounding in children's rights. Then the rest is on my CV on how I've worked in the intersections of children's rights, women's rights, and also just generally social justice. So when I saw this invitation and I was told someone has nominated me, I then was like, okay, my vision for this is really a province where children are actually counted the moment a parent is pregnant. And we don't wait for them until they come out and we're like, oh, we have a plan for you. So for me, it's really at conception. Then we walk with those kids until they graduate from childhood. And if we take things like that, for me, it then means we even have projections as a province on what are the birth rates, what is happening so that we are ready in terms of resourcing and also working with the children going forward. So really for me, as you can see, it's a province where all the children are valued equally, safeguarded and empowered, because the empowerment that I received as a child back then, I don't think it's the empowerment that today's children need. It's a new nuance of empowerment. It's empowerment because kids are Googling their rights, they know their rights, but it's also about how do they hold those rights in a society that continuously tell the children what to do and never hear them. So for me, my role will be really about enabling the children to tell what they want, but tell it in a way that is like how when I came for that summit back in 1992, there was issues like access to education and access to health, and they allowed us, I'm already on my presentation, they allowed us to actually speak about our own experience and then foresee the future of South Africa, because at that point, it was just before 1994. And when I saw the things around equal education after that, as a child who had spoken on equal education, I was even on the Molo Songololo back then it was a newsletter, and but I was there captured as a child who stood for equal education during the summit. So going forward, it will be enabling and ensuring that all children realize and enjoy the right of equality to life and also opportunity, because it shouldn't be where you were born, but it should be where you are going. And the Western Cape has its own disparities. They are either based on which district are you in? Is it a rural district? Is it a farming district? Is it an urban district, or are you born in the metro? And all those kids have different opportunities, and they also have different challenges that they face. So my vision is we will be leaving no one behind. Can I have the next slide, please? So it's based on that, and I'm not going to dwell much on the vision of the commissioner. I took it exactly as it is from the Act, because that is the guideline. And as someone who has worked for a commission before, I know how the mandate of the commission is always something that drives everything that you do and say. But what I want to mark around the Commission for Children, it's this process where, as the commissioner, you'll be receiving complaints. And for me, I still want to make it as easy as possible for children. Even when it comes to what they are complaining about, I think I still want it to be even different from just a form. It must also be in form of art. It should be in form of essays. It should be in form of poetry. Kids should be able to, even in songs, because sometimes in the songs that children sing, there is their pain and there's their story there. So I'm looking at that. How do you change that? Next slide, please. And my priorities, you will see there are two of them, because the foundation has been laid with the previous commissioner. The systems of running the office are there, so I wouldn't really focus much. I will just tweak there and strengthen where it doesn't really work. But my biggest priorities are two. It's one, increase the number of services available to children to improve overall well-being of all children in the Western Cape. Here, I'm simply saying I will strengthen and increase accountability across the board, including resourcing. Because it's one thing to say the main departments that the commissioner works with are health, education, and cultural affairs and sports. I've forgotten the fourth one, I know. But when you work there, what is the resourcing that is responsive to children's need? So I come from a background of budgeting and being responsive in that budgeting, because if you are not responsive in your budgeting, you can have nice plans. All these departments have APPs, but if those APPs are not resourced with a geared mind of enabling a well-being of all children, we might as well just close shop, because then it's not going to happen. The second priority that I have is around decreasing the number of children that fall through the systemic cracks. Already there are systems, and it was nice before because you could blame it to apartheid. Before, but now you can't. It's 30 years later. So it is the systems that we live with. It's the systems that we've created in the new South Africa, but they still somehow make kids to be lost in the system. Some of them are never found after they've been lost in that system. So how do we make sure that the social and safety nets that are created do not miss the children? Therefore, the children are able to enjoy the equality of life and opportunities. There, I'm simply saying, guided by the CRC convention, I want to enact again the promotion and protection of inherent rights to survival and growth and protection. Because you find that at an international level, you find it even in the nuances of it in our constitution, but you also then find it in the nuances of the Western Cape Constitution, and even edified by the fact that we now have this Act of 2019, number 2, that then puts in place the commissioner. So really, you are at a level where now it just has to happen. So how do we amplify that? And my biggest thing is the strategy when it comes to this. It's going to be intersectional, because when you see a child, you see the outer part of the child. You are lucky to know where they were born. You are lucky to know who are their parents and what are the trajectories of their parents. But if you look at a child, you need to look at them from an intersectional perspective. I saw that we also look at children who are migrants. We're looking at children who are with a disability. We're looking at children who have fallen into criminality, somehow incarcerated, or we call them children in trouble with the law, things like that. So how do you, from that perspective, still value the equality of life and opportunity for all those multi-intersectional identities of those children? So for me, it will be accelerate, amplify, and consolidate what works. It's important to consolidate what works, because as a commissioner, you cannot only be speaking about what doesn't work. You also need to say what works. What works gets amplified, gets accelerated. What doesn't work get back and be redefined again. Next slide, please. And then I believe I bring a set of very different competencies. I'm not only a children's rights advocate, but I'm a human rights advocate. Social justice is my thing. And I don't come from a legal background, but I've mastered the legalities of human rights, because I wouldn't be able to do the work that I've done so far. So, and also my grounding at the Commission for Gender Equality as the head for 2 provinces. At one point it was Free State, and then I came down here to the Western Cape, but I also ran national projects. So for example, when we did the shelter investigation on GBV, I was the special advisor internally to put those things together. So I also come with that background of knowing the law, knowing the policies of the state and the practices, but how do we ensure that they are doing what they are geared to do? So those are some of my qualities. And then when it comes to stakeholder engagements, I really believe in relationship building, connections and influencing, because anyone that you have around the table should be having something that it's in for them, but also what is in for me. And we must have a common vision. The next slide. Then I decided to just stick with my 60 months, because when I was calculating 5 years is 60 months. And of course it will be my goals, but the pillars of the implementation of the strategy that I come with is collaboration, innovation, and recommendations that will be done to the departments. So every time something is happening, I need to also collaborate with the departments, innovate with them, because we systematically want to improve the package of services that we give to the children. So that becomes very important. How do we do this? There will be knowledge development and management, meaning documenting what works and what doesn't, and then feed what works into the system so that there's continuous improvement and betterment, including investment in the services that we give to children. The next one will be around promote continuous improvement on children's services, which really is so when you do an investigation and then you come up with recommendations, it's better when you stagger them, because there are recommendations that can be done within 3 to 6 months. There are those that will need 6 to 12 months. And then there are those that have so much impact on the budget and planning, and those you stagger them for the next 36 to 48 months, so that it is also intentional when the departments are responding. It's not like because they fear that the next report report will say they have not achieved. So you start working with the departments in ensuring that the recommendations are implemented. I left the last 48 to 60 months out because that will be when it's the last year of the term, and you don't really want to start new things. But what you then do is start also foreseeing the future and the handover. What are these things that you will hand over that become the legacy of the time when you are a commissioner? Data and digital innovation is the way to go. If it's not at the fingertips of anyone, it's really these days, it doesn't matter that much. So I will be also looking at getting a dashboard that maps the services that we give to kids and children. The reason why it must be on a dashboard, it's because for me, there's a concept of building blocks. There must be basic things in each community that makes that community a child-friendly and responsive community for children. So what we'll end up with is all the districts in the province will have this dashboard, and district mayors will have to tell us why they don't have sporting facilities, why don't they have learning clubs, all these things. And also when it comes to shelters and services for kids, it will also be important to map what the departments are providing, including clinics, nearest immunization centers and all those things. So that dashboard for me is that dashboard that makes someone make a decision now in terms of investing and even improving. That's one of the things. And then inclusive participation, I take it back to my days in 1992, how there was a cumulative process that took me from KwaZulu-Natal to Cape Town. I mean, and for me, that was real child participation, where I grew up in a farming community. So it was really child participation that was planned properly, aware of what are the nuances of the children in the province to get them to a place where they can speak on for their own. And then, of course, as the commissioner, you then have to do legal reporting and policy compliance. That will be at a provincial, national, and international space, including the African Charter and the CRC, which is the International Charter. So yeah, that will be what I will do in the next 60 months if I do get this position. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to move on to the questions. I think just be aware of time. I'm also keeping an eye on the clock because we need to move through the 10 questions. The first one is from Member Heron.
The first question is, what value does your previous job experience add to the role of the Children's Commissioner?
My previous job experience was I was the head of the Commission for Gender Equality, which opened me up to many different strategies on how commissions work. And also my social justice work, which really is framed around enabling and ensuring that equality is real for everyone. So all these things make me to be better positioned to be a commissioner. And also the fact that I don't only work from a script of just law and rights, but I also work from a script of responsibility as the rights holder. So I believe a lot in the rights-based approach, where the rights holders and the duty bearers actually have a conversation on what needs to be. And yeah, I really think my previous, even starting from my very, very first job, all of them have somehow have intertwined and have synergies to prepare me for who I am today and what I'm able to present. And I'm currently also running a national program on the implementation of the NSP GPVF, which is directly from the presidency. I'm supporting 15 national departments and 9 provincial offices of the premiers to make sure that they implement the NSP GPV. So for me, that type of support, but also being an eye, is something that I've perfected very well. And I think, yeah, I will be able to run this position very well. Thank you. Thanks, member.
Thank you. Member Kaiser-Philander.
Thank you very much, Chair. What are the 3 biggest challenges that children are faced with in the Western Cape? And how will you, as the Commissioner for Children, approach those issues?
I just needed to write them first. Thank you, Member Philander, for that question. The biggest for me is inequality. My entry comes from an inequality perspective. Inequality to opportunities and inequality to access to services. So that is the first one. And this is really from a special perspective, but also I think it's also from an investment perspective. So if people are running a race, and then the ones that are in front already have their techies and they're well kitted, and then you have people at the back who are running the same race but are not kitted. So if when you invest more on the ones that are not kitted compared to the one that are in front. So for me, that's how we'll then start chipping away the inequalities and the experience of inequality. Because for me, a child that is born in the new South Africa shouldn't be made to even contemplate what it meant to be living in apartheid, because they can't touch it. They hear stories about it, but we can't allow children to live those experiences out of context. Prior 1994, there was a context. Now, post 1994, there's no context. And by now, the bridge must be closer. So for me, the issue of inequality, I come from KwaZulu-Natal. I've been here for almost 10 years now. And there are scenes in the Western Cape that when I see them, I'm like, it can't be like this. So for me, that is the first thing. And in each and every community, I mean, I've even been to Dorrance. And when I get there, the first people that you see, it's children. And through the eyes of the children, you know what is happening. So those eyes needs to be smiling eyes. We need to work more on smiling eyes than the eyes that, can you help me? I'm hungry. Children shouldn't be going to bed hungry in the Western Cape. There's plenty of food. So for me, that inequality becomes a big, big entry that one will use and help children to come out. The second one is poverty. It's poverty of food, but it's also poverty of information, poverty of knowledge, and poverty of attention. We need to have more recreation services for children. There's a project that I supported at Drakenstein municipality where they worked with all the wards to work with over 1,000 young people to keep them busy around sports. And that resulted in them not being part of violence, not even being in spaces where there is violence or being part of perpetrating violence. So for me, it becomes important that how we take children out of poverty is also linked to prevention of violence, because it's violence against them, it's also violence by them, and it's also ensuring that children are in spaces where it's safe. So the last one for me is violence. Children in the Western Cape are bystanders of violence, are victims of violence, are witnesses of violence from many different perspectives. And we really need to start asking ourselves, where did it went wrong? When did we stop knowing that it takes a village to raise a child? Because it seems like we've forgotten that it takes a village to raise a child. And that village doesn't mean it's the village from where you are, but it means it's the village of the Western Cape. So how do we reignite the villageness of raising children? Because those children are actually our future and they are our present. So if we raise them as a village, we are investing in our village and wanting to know that by 2063, we have a better village. So if we don't invest in the children and start working on these key things that I see, I think we will lose it as well. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Member Syed?
Thank you very much, Chairperson. How do you propose to translate some of the identified community concerns into practical solutions within the constraints of limited resources? Thank you.
The good thing is that, Member Said, the challenges have been identified. So what needs to come back is next is identifying people that we can collaborate with, because if we don't have money as the state, private sector has money, civil society gets funding to do things. So how do we make sure that we create linkages that make sense, linkages that show that it takes a village to raise a child? So what is the private sector going to do about it? And also, what about the civil society that do get funding to do things? We also have social and cultural groups like churches, mosques, and everyone else who, at the end of the day, need those children because the children are the future. So for me, it's more about collaborations going forward and partnerships, but also looking at internally from the state's perspective, where are we wasting money? Because there will be things that the states can do without and they will still function. So how do we repurpose money that is geared toward wasteful expenditure and start using that money to resolve some of these problems that have already been identified? So that will be my approach, because when it comes to the resources, it's better to pool resources together than each and every sector trying to resolve the same issue on its own. So that's how I will look at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, is it contextualized?
Yes.
Okay.
Very quick. I don't want to take up too much time, but just link to that. How would you be able to pull together private sector assistance within this limited resource space? Are you?
It's very basic. Anyone who runs a business wants customers. And if those customers are young, then you nurture them, they grow up, they get jobs, they buy your products. So it's not because private sector will be doing anyone a favor, they'll be doing themselves a favor, continuity of business. So for me, I look at it that way. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Member Stevens?
Thank you, Chair. Ma'am, given that monitoring and reporting are the aspects of the Commissioner, how would you go about in raising awareness to the departments and executive? What monitoring tools will be implemented? How would you manage a situation where government departments or the executive do not want to cooperate with the Office of the Commissioner? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Stevens. So monitoring of the policies and practices of the departments that we need to work with, I think first and foremost, it's identifying which aspects of their key mandates speak to the rights of the children. And then then you create a template that actually allows the department to say, this is how we are responsive to the needs of the children, and this is how we are doing it. And that template for me must be a conversational template. So I just can't come with a template and say, Department of Education here, fill and continue. So there will be these nurturing initial relationship building moments. And looking at the current template that the previous commissioner has made, with improvements so that we get to the real thing. For example, I am very aware of gender mainstreaming, for example, where someone will say, no, we've mainstreamed. We said in our thing, in our plans, we'll include women. For me, that's not mainstreaming. So people who say including children, I want to know how. So break down the how you include children, and that is where the crux of the matter is. How are children included? That is what will then be monitoring. And we can also convert those things into indicators, because if they are not in indicator form, we are also not going to move. The population of children, how many children do we have in the Western Cape? Where are we sitting currently? What is the baseline? So we'll start from a baseline. For each department, they must have a progression towards total coverage of all children. So that's how I see monitoring. It's not about what you want to do as a department, but it's about how you are responsive to the needs out there. And because we are working with limited resources, so there is also the rights of progressive realization of rights that is also spoken about in the Constitution. So you package that and give it to the department and say, we realize that we have constraints, but because there's progressive realization of rights that is supported by the Constitution, you have 5 months, we have 5 years to do this, and also there's midterm reviews of your budget. What do you do then if it was originally not in your budget? So it's also monitoring that is attached to budgeting, but monitoring that is also attached to the implementation and also the auditing. I want to see the Auditor General being able to take services that are for children and actually reward departments that are very intentional about doing services for children. Because if we don't audit what goes to children, how do we know it's going there? So there must be a tagging of some sort that we then start putting in our APPs that are about children's rights so that we see where we are actually going. So that's the way I see monitoring and evaluation, and it should be holistic. It shouldn't be about services alone. And then the biggest thing, so there will be workshops, of course, to raise awareness, and also the monitoring tool. As I said, it will be a participatory monitoring tool that is co-created with the departments that it's meant for. And if people don't want to cooperate, I'm sure they have their leaders who are ministers who report to this committee. So I don't think anyone wouldn't want to, because at the end of the day, they are asked to serve. And if you don't want to serve, you need to give the committee reasons why you don't want to serve. It's not about me as the commissioner. It's about you doing your task that you've been asked to do. And if you don't want to, then you come to the committee and let them know why you want to continue being a minister of a department that doesn't do what it's meant to do. For me, it's really about accountability across. And that accountability across must also be empowered with leadership. So leadership should take its oversight role. So I expect a lot of support from this committee when departments don't want to do what they need to do, because there will be a minister, there will be an HOD, and there will be then chief directors and everyone else. So somewhere there is someone responsible for what is not happening, and somehow we do also need to find ways of holding people accountable to real deliveries. So yeah, that's how I will see this one. And thank you, Member Stevens.
Thank you. Member van Wyk?
Yes, how would you ensure that the Children's Act is implemented on the ground and ultimately to benefit children then? And if you could give us perhaps a practical example.
I didn't get to the last question.
To give a practical example on how that Children's Act is to be implemented.
Thank you, Member van Wyk. So the Children's Act, for me, it's like the guideline. If you are looking at what you can do that needs to be done for children, the Children's Act is your guideline. So we might maybe take one example around, let me not use education. I think I've used education a lot. But let me look at maybe access to health for kids. And this comes from a perspective of immunization, for example. The other day, I was listening to the radio that we are all of a sudden having children who are now presenting with diseases that could have been prevented. But because we had COVID, there was a missed immunization that happened. So this then means if someone has a child, it's not only about the stamping of the card, but it's also how do we get a system that reminds people on their phones that your next immunization for your child is due. And how do we make sure that that doesn't only go to the mother, but it also goes to someone else who supports the mother? Because also when it comes to the best interest of a child and health, there's this heavy reliance on mothers. And mothers are also alone, sometimes single parents. So for me, when I look at health, for example, that would be one area where I will want to amplify how what is naturally supposed to be children's rights access is actually also made to be extended in a way that allows mothers to still continue working, but still take their children for immunization, but also build those social networks around them. For me, all the rights that the children have, they are actually supposed to be rights that all the communities are aware of. So the health one, that is what I will want to do. The second one is around children who are in trouble with the law. I think there's this thing, this project that I've come across, projects that are done by NICRO, for example, where they work with children who are in trouble with the law and reintroduce them back into the communities. So, and for me, those are some of the examples that I will want to use, because in the Western Cape, there is a focus on grooming children to become gangsters. And it's seen as a lucrative future for children. But then what do we do with children who are now caught up, but whose intentions was never to become a criminal? And how do we empower them in a way that even when they go back to communities, they are not seen as, well, now you've been in jail, so there's nothing we can do with you. So how do we expand the offer that is currently there to ensure that we are truly reintegrating children into the society without any discrimination or tagging? So these are experimental things that I will want to do and strengthen what we currently offer for the children. And I hope the role allows for that. Partnerships and also allows for support in that way of doing things. Thank you, Member Van Beek.
Thank you very much. Member Walters?
How would you defend the integrity of the Children's Commissioner, and how would you protect the functional independence of the Commissioner?
Thank you, Member Walters. Yeah, integrity is a big one because you can't buy it online. You can't even walk down an aisle and buy integrity. Integrity is what you do and how you do it on a daily basis. So as a commissioner, you can't have favorites. And you also can't have those that you're like, I'm not speaking to that one. We are constantly on a middle lane, but a very objective middle lane, not as a bystander that doesn't say anything. But if you are saying to the Minister of Education, you have 7 days to give me an answer, you must say the very same thing to the Minister of Health, also the Minister of Social Development. You cannot be picky and choosing. Secondly, if you give recommendations, you can then say, oh yeah, maybe those recommendations slightly apply to you, but really it's up to you to decide whether you implement them or not. I mean, you can't be doing that, because at the end of the day, if as a commissioner you lose integrity, we are also making the rights of the children vulnerable. And we are also making the rights of the children as if they are a negotiable tool. Like anyone can come up with their own measure and be like, oh yeah, it sounds like it. So there's standards. There is the law that tells you what are the children's rights. There's the Constitution. There's also the Children's Rights Act. Stick to those things. those things will actually help you as a commissioner to have integrity of yourself as an individual, but also of the office. So it's really out there. You can be guided by that. How do you future the independence, or how do you protect the independence? Is that the question, member?
The term was functional independence.
Functional independence. Oh, thank you. Because I see F here, but I forgot. So functional independence means within the 5 years, you actually foresee your role. So the good thing is that this office has been there for 5 years, so there are baselines. Then on those baselines, then you work on, for example, if you are all the departments annually, you must know where they are. So for me, it's creating something like a barometer for departments, because in that barometer, then I have instilled functionality. Someone can know if we are here, it means this is what is not happening. If we are there, this is what is not happening. So I don't want to be like a person who sneaks up on ministers and their departments. No, it must be known. Annually, there will be a questionnaire that you will fill, and that questionnaire will tell us where you are as a department. That then helps the functionality of the office. Every year there will be bilateral meetings with ministers to say, last year, this is what you achieved and what are your hopes for this year, because this is the context. So for me, it's really about consultation that comes with dignity and respect and value of other people's roles, because that is also very important. Because if we really want to get children's rights being normalized, it's also about acknowledging the value of the other roles. Because as the commissioner, you can't be always dangling the carrot and the stick. There must also be a moment of realization that you have the carrot, you have the stick, but you need something to happen in between. So the functionality for me is putting out the expectations from the beginning, and also trying to make sure that there's a systemic way of how things are done. Of course, there will be ad hoc investigations that come to the table of the commissioner that will require investigation. But for me, for the office to be functional, I think there will be 2 forms of investigations. There'll be investigations that come because someone has complained, and then there'll be systemic investigations where we're like, okay, how is this APP really resulting in the realization of children's rights? Let's just zoom into maybe food that is served at schools. Are all children served with food? What is the public transport, the scholars' transport? How is that actually keeping children safe and all? So there will be these systemic investigations, which for me are, number one, a mirror for the departments, but also are an activator of how we can improve what is currently there. So there will be that type of functionality. And I hope I heard your question very well. Thanks, Member Van Wyk. Walters, thank you.
Thank you very much. And back to Member Heron.
Thank you. The next question has got 2 parts.
Yes.
And it's really about the current methods or systems employed by the first Children's Commissioner.
Mhm.
So the first part of the question is, as Commissioner for Children, how do you view the Child Monitor Program? And if you were to change it, how would you involve child government monitors and children's sectors? And the second part of the question is, how will you ensure that initiatives like the child government monitors incorporate children's voices and their perspectives are integrated into your work and decision-making processes on a municipal or government level? Did you get all that? Should I?
I'm just trying to put it. Thanks, Member Heron. Yes, so as I was saying earlier on, I really value the fact that there are systems in place, and the systems that are there in place, they come from a long history of involving children to get to what we currently have in the Office of the Children's Commissioner, the Child Monitor Program. For me, it will be just strengthening it. to a point where maybe the ways that children are able to monitor is also easy for them, and also comes from a perspective of access and easiness. So instead of maybe monitoring annually, I will want to do it twice a year, but also incorporate camps that come with this monitoring, because when children are monitoring something, they also want to hear from the people that they are monitoring. So there will be chats and face-to-face with the ministers of the various departments, but also with, because there's an element of a street address. So as a minister, you are responsible for the whole province, but people who are in local government are actually responsible for the actual ward and what happens. So that will also be championed together, because whatever is a service, the children are receiving it at a local government level, at a street address level. So there will be also district engagements, and they won't only end with a district mayor. I'm also interested in getting local municipality mayors involved, because I've been hearing quite a lot of children's services that have been actually I don't know if devoluted or given, yes, that's the word. Yeah, given to local government. They actually work for children, because children are here and they know where these things are. So one of the major things that will be maybe a method of improving what is already there is also tracking at a municipal level. That's why earlier on I spoke about the dashboard, because that dashboard will then be localized. So if you live at the city of Cape Town and we are at Ward 29, we are able to come in, see what is there. Are there parks? Are there school grounds? What is there? What is not there? So for me, it will just also be digitalizing and visualizing that monitoring, so that everyone is able to also assist in the monitoring. Then the second one is about the voices of children. Of course, the office of the commissioner is here to amplify children's voices, and at no point does the commissioner speak on behalf of the children. The commissioner locates, positions, and ensure that children are able to voice their own voices. And these come in different forms. There are platforms where it's easy for children to say what they need to say, but there are also platforms where children must be prepared and be orientated into the spaces that they need to go and speak about. I believe in lived experiences, so there's no way that I can speak on behalf of a child. I was a child until 1994, then my childhood ended there. So at this stage, children will be the ones that will be speaking for themselves. And what will then happen is also working with the ears of the people whom the voices are talking to. Because it's one thing to see the kids, the children. Sorry, I use kids and children interchangeably. Children, but it's one thing to hear them and actually do what the children are asking. And there's something important about a child voice that needs a commitment. So when the children have said what they want, there must be an expectation resolved in that meeting. So as a minister coming to speak to the children, if there's something that you definitely know it's not going to happen, voice it there, because you don't want a collective trauma of expectation not met to go across all children. So for me, it's also about working and preparing the holders of children's rights, the duty bearers, to know how to also work with children, hear them, and be very straight from the onset that no, those ones won't be done. This one is possible and that is not possible, so that we don't have a generation of children that feel that they are socially neglected, even by those that are meant to lead and provide for them. So that's a very long response, but that's how I see it. Thank you, Member Heron.
Thank you very much. Question 8 is Member Kaiser Philander.
Thank you very much, Chair. Given the high levels of child trafficking in the Western Cape, how would you propose that the Office of the Commissioner for Children would seek to address this specific matter? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Fernanda. This problem is really one of those that somehow makes the Western Cape a destination, but also it makes the Western Cape a province to avoid. So, because there is a high number of activities around child trafficking that happens in the Western Cape. So the first point is, where are the hotspots and why those areas are hotspots? And this again goes back to my earlier conversation around the dashboard and knowing what is in the localities and what is not there. And I live in Blowback. And when I was moving from where I was moving and told people I was going to stay in that particular area, Parklands to be particular, I was told to tie my children on me each time I go to the mall. And I was like, why should I do that? They said there are people lurking in the corners of all the malls who take children. And for me as a parent, I was halfway to the Western Cape when I had that information, but that also made me aware that there's high numbers of trafficking of children in the Western Cape. But that is a problem of our own society. The fact that someone told me that, it means people are known who traffic these children. And there's a whole lot of value chain that is there. And so how in partnership with NPA, with also SAPS, do we, as the Office of the Children Commission, make sure that we decrease the numbers of children that get trafficked? Because that is important. Because if there's no intention on decreasing the numbers in the hotspots that we know, and also when we say there are no hotspots, how do we know? Maybe it's those children that never get reported. That's why we're thinking not everywhere is a hotspot for child trafficking. So for me, it becomes important to start from where is child trafficking happening? What is not present in those communities that enable this type of crime to happen? And how do we compare with the areas where this type of crime is not dominant? What can we learn from there and transport it here? And I know that my limitations of implementation are very high, but the recommendations will then come with it to say, but let's compare districts, for example. Metro is maybe the highest place. What is it that is happening in the metro that enables this compared to maybe a place like Garden Road or Karoo? What is happening? So for me, it becomes a collaboration as well. But it's not something that we should shy away and say it doesn't happen. It is. Some people come for business that is legal, but others come for business that is illegal to the Western Cape. And how do we counter the illegal parts of why people come and be in the Western Cape? So it's a collaboration for me. Community safety is very important. I remember there was a time when there was a minister who used to do they call them walking bus for the children who are going to school? Yes. So how do we make sure that those walking bus are not only in the communities where we think child trafficking is high, but they're a common thing? Someone in my area who came, their child decided, the school is just around the corner, I will walk. They walked for about 3 days. On day 4, they were told there are 2 options that you have. One is to be a dealer or be a buyer. There are 2 options. Either you're a dealer or you're a buyer. Which one are you going to choose? Because if you want to walk these streets protected, you need to do one of those 2. And this child went home and told the mom and the dad, and the next day they had to now start driving the child. So it's not only child trafficking that is a problem, it's also dealing of illegal substances, and children are then identified, particularly when they are seen that they come from a household that can actually afford this type of recreation. So we are not only protecting children who come from poor backgrounds, but you also need to protect those who come from backgrounds where parents are able to afford, because they get lost in the consumption of illegal substances as well. So we lose those children as well. So it's not only child trafficking that is an issue, but it's generally all these illegal crimes that target children. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Then we have question 9 from Member Syed.
Thank you very much. What steps would you take as Commissioner for Children to address the lack of forensic support in sexual and child abuse cases? And can you provide an example of similar initiatives which you've led or supported in the past to improve response and support for victims?
Sure. This one, I think we need a national convention to deal with the issue of forensic services in South Africa. Just the other day, there was like 143,000 outstanding cases that have not been resolved because of forensics in this country. So I don't think it's an issue that only the commissioner can deal with. I think the commissioner needs other commissioners, for example, commissioner for SAPS, but because forensic services really sits with them, but also Department of Health in terms of taking the samples, they're also very important. So, and then the child units in the various police stations, it's a very big issue, but maybe one that for me is a challenge, and a challenge that maybe must be resolved, because as far as I remember, even when I worked on the protocol for child abuse and neglect, the forensics were still an issue, and that was in 1999 when I came out of university. So it's a decade-old issue, and I want to propose a targeted approach of maybe doing a project that has a particular time frame to see the results, so that we know, is it because there's no staff, or is it because there are no labs? What is the problem, and how do we bring resources around? For example, private hospitals have proper running forensic units, and sometimes those units are not utilized because few people can afford private health. So how do we then have a proper partnership with the private sector that have forensic services that actually embeds the agency that someone who has been sexually assaulted needs help with? I heard again that when you are there for forensics at a hospital, when someone who's been in a motor accident comes in, you who's looking for the forensics get sidelined, they deal with saving lives. So how do we also at the healthcare centers make sure that there are dedicated rooms where we deal particularly and attend to sexual offenses there and there? Because it's also about getting the evidence while it is meaningful, but also making sure that we don't make the victim to feel secondary victimized in the process. So I would want to maybe, I think at the Western Cape has maybe 6 Tutuzela centers. So maybe we can start by comparing how are the forensics being done in the Western Cape, and see how we can then fast track and probably also locate the nearest hospitals that can then assist with forensic services. Because someone who's been sexually violated, they are also told don't bath. So do I stay not bath for 3 hours? Do I stay not bath for 48 hours? I'm told come back the next day, which means I'm sitting with this violation back and forth. And for children, it's even worse, because now as a parent or a caregiver or a guardian, you now have to explain to the child who feels that whatever has happened makes them feel unclean. But you need to say, oh, my child, you just need to bear with the uncleanliness just because someone needs to take something from you. So for me, it's about fast-tracking agent issues. Sexual offenses is an agent issue in our country. We should treat it like a crisis. For any crisis, we know that we normally bend a bit of rules, we throw a bit of resources in there, and we make sure that everyone is on board on ensuring that we resolve the crisis. So for me, sexual offenses will be treated as a crisis, and we'll need a crisis team around it. And that team will come across all the various departments, including private sector that actually holds the fair share of the resources, but that fair share of the resources is only utilized by a minority of the citizens. So yeah, that's how I look at it. So it will be one area of another public-private partnership, but also bring on board civil society, because they are sometimes the ones that are taking children to get these services. Yeah, so that's what I will say for that one. Thank you.
Thank you. And then the last question is from Member Steve.
Thank you, Chair. How would you advocate and support children with special needs to access education so they can live a meaningful post-school life? Thank you.
Thank you, Member Stevens. My mother was a teacher. She taught English and business studies. And I remember how she came home when the policy on inclusive education came about. She was very frustrated, and I did not really understand what was the frustration. And her first thing was, at home, she calls me Matloli. So she was like, Matloli, you know what they expect us to do now is to teach children with disabilities. And I am not even equipped to deal with a disability, let alone teach a child with a disability. So for me, it's also about what is the status on the teacher's abilities. Have we capacitated and strengthened the capacity of teachers to really be inclusive, or we are wanting to do a tick box where we ask each school how many children are with a disability in your school? Good if you have them. So are we complying so that we look as if we are implementing the inclusive education policy? Or are we really enabling the field? If we are enabling the field, we must have built capacity. We must also have added resources that allow for children with disabilities to be in those schools without feeling othered. So so for me, it would be important that something is done around the accommodation, reasonable accommodation in each and every school. And probably we also need to start looking at, in these districts, how many schools actually meet the reasonable accommodation in terms of visual disabilities, but also the invisible disabilities, because there's quite a hype around ensuring that the visible disabilities are met. But there's quite a lot of investment in investing in invisible disabilities. And what we are finding is that actually more children are with invisible disabilities. And if they are caught early, it's easy to channel by offering OT support, by putting other children on relevant medication to keep them in school in the environment where there's other children, where it's inclusive. But I'm also very interested in, it used to be called special schools back then. I'm not sure if we still call them special schools. I'm also very interested in finding out the investment in special schools. My cousin, who's 2 years older than me, was lucky to be raised by my grandmother, who was a nurse. And right away, she knew that she had a disability and took her from grade RR to a school that was catered for her. And today she is a productive, a professional. But not all children are lucky to have someone who's a guardian, a parent, who has that education to see that this child is going to need special attention. So also the awareness for me in communities is very important. Awareness of even being able as a neighbor to say, "Ah, but your child is not walking by this age. They should be walking. Have you asked the nurses at the clinic to just look at your child again?" So that type of support, because children with disabilities, some of them, they end up being hidden in the homes and we never see them out there. So in my role, I think community awareness is important, but ensuring that the implementation of inclusive policy, education policy that happens is also important. And then also, even here, there are civil society organizations that do a lot of advocacy work around disability. So they become very important, but also specifically the ones that deal with disability in the education sector, they become very important. So it will also be partnerships and ensuring that there is no child with a disability that is left behind. Remember, my main thing is it's the realization and the equalization of life opportunities and also access to services. So children with disabilities, they have the same proximity, they have the same agency that they need to access their rights on. Yeah, so that would be how I'll be looking at that. Thank you, Member Stevens.
Thank you very much. That deals with all the questions. We have not received any objections to your nomination, so I don't need to ask you any questions about that. And that is it. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you very much for talking to us and the presentation. Going forward, we obviously complete our interviews today and tomorrow. Then we will deliberate. So it'll be a couple of weeks, I think, probably before the standing committee is able to make recommendations. But you will certainly be informed. And thank you very much for being here.
Okay, thank you, Chairperson,
Thank
and
you.
thank you all members for having me.
Hello, welcome. Right, I'm Benedicta van Minnen. I am the chair of the Standing Committee. Welcome to Premier and Constitutional Matters. We'll just introduce the committee and then we can just discuss the process of how the interview is going to work so that you are fully appraised of that. Let's start with Member Kaiser-Philander.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good day, Mr. Smith. My name is Wendy Kaiser-Philander, and I'm a member of this committee.
Good day. I'm Leon van Wyk. I'm a member of this committee.
I'm Thomas Walters. I'm a member of the committee.
I'm Donita Stevens, and I'm a member of this committee.
Hi, good day. I'm Khalid Said, and I'm a member of the committee.
And I'm Brett Heron, a member of the committee.
I see we are just unfortunately running 11 minutes late, but we will make sure that you get that extra time. So don't be concerned about that. What's going to happen is that you can introduce yourself and then go directly into your presentation, which is you've got 10 minutes for the presentation. Then we have, it's about 45 minutes left over for 10 questions, which people will then ask. So just be aware of time as you answer. Also, this is being screened live on YouTube because as a Standing Committee of Parliament, we do like our meetings to be open and transparent. So please go ahead when you're ready.
Ah, first mistake. Thank you very much, Chairperson and Honourable Committee. My name is Markwyn Smith, and I am a social service professional by profession. I'm a social worker actually by profession. I have over a decade of experience in social development, which includes social work in particular and community development. I've worked in various levels, both from a production point of view, social worker, frontline social worker, dealing with the Children's Act, the new Act, and the Child Justice Act. I also served as a social work supervisor and community development supervisor the past, between 2019 and 2022. So those were 3 years, and that was in a rural community, Kannaland municipality. And I also worked at the provincial office of the Department of Social Development for 3 years, doing monitoring evaluation within the victim empowerment sector. So currently, since 2023, I find myself in academia, teaching, but still involved in practice-related issues because I serve also on 2 organizations board. One is Abbeyfield SA, which deals with older persons, and then also Touching Nations, that deals with a variety of services. Based on my experience, I have obviously, both experience as a frontline social worker, dealing with the Children's Act, dealing with the vulnerabilities of children. And also, I have also experience in community development. Why is that so important? I think as an institution and as a government, we need to really advocate and lobby with regard to community-led interventions because those are sustainable interventions. So for now, that's my introduction, Honourable Chair. So I'm going to continue with my presentation, if that's okay with the committee.
Just in terms of process, when you want to move over from a page, just say next, and our procedural officer
Okay.
will make sure that
All right,
happens.
thank you very much. So, Chairperson, what you can expect today from my presentation is to articulate my vision, obviously within the boundaries of the current legislation and the Constitution of the Western Cape, and also the Children's Act, obviously. And then I'm going to continue with from my vision statement to lean into the core priorities and functions of the commissioner. This will be followed by what I suggest as essential qualities, but it's not limited to what I suggest, obviously, and also the key competencies I think that is necessary for the commissioner. And then lastly, I will end my presentation with the strategies on how I to achieve my vision or my impact statement. So just some background, and I think colleagues, you would obviously know this much better. So we have almost 30% of our population in the Western Cape are children. So it's quite a dense population. Um, from that 2.1 million of children, 28.40 are children, falling into the early childhood phase. So early childhood is definitely the area that we need to focus on. Primary childhood life phase, that is 28.55, and the early adolescent life phase 27. And this is where lots of our issues comes in, because you will also note that suicide is rising and mental health issues are rising amongst that particular group. And then we have the late adolescent life phase, and that's a bit lower, that's 18%. So in this particular province, but not limited to this particular province, I think, from a national point of view, our children are faced with income poverty, food insecurity, crime and violence, social exclusion. And I said they're children from rural communities, but also your children that face disability challenges, children that are facing, your ECD sector, for example, how many children have access in the community to ECD facilities. So those are where the social exclusion part comes in. And I want to quickly, pause here, because based on that particular statement, what children are facing, hence the education, the right to education is so important, because it's not only the quality education they receive in school, but also they receive their meals. So that address, the food insecurity. They're also protected to some, extent from crime and violence when they're in school. And then are obviously included, in a range of activities. So there you can already see from a strategic priority point of view that education for me is quite important. And then obviously, we speak about the Constitution of the Western Cape, Section 78, speaks directly of the promotion, the protection and promotion of the interests of children. And here I want to also, because children are exposed to a variety of things, but the Children Acts, according to Section 150, are quite clear. When a child is in need care protection, Section 7 of the Act is quite clear in terms of what does it mean when we speak about best interest of a child. Hence the background of, I think, a social service professional, or, for example, someone who has law experience, of some of the top skills, competencies, and qualities that one should need in the commission office or as a commissioner. You can move on, Konik. Thank you. So my vision, it's more or less, a vision statement, and you will see that this vision statement is crafted within the paradigm of what the Act currently allows. So firstly, the Act, and I think it's Section 7 of the Act, of the Western Cape Children's Commissioners Act, are quite clear that the commissioner must be independent. And must be so rightfully so fearless when it comes to keeping those 4 departments, accountable. And it's important that the commissioner includes all the voices of children within the province. That means your voices coming from your township communities, from rural areas, and with that, how do we reimagine? And I want to build on the current commissioner's vision, is how do we reimagine and transforming childhoods in the Western Cape by protecting their rights and well-being through meaningful participation and collaboration. So I think in the next phase of the commissioner term, it's very important that we look at collaboration, look at establishing institutional partnerships, and not only with the 4 partners that the Western Cape Constitution gives oversight over, but build beyond those particular partnerships, because I'm all for sustainable development, and we cannot do that without partnership. And I want to end here with my vision. It's important that every child is heard. It speaks about exclusion and inclusion. Every child is empowered through meaningful participation. Every child is thriving. Now, it sounds like very, very, very big task, but I mean, we need to have a vision that's broad enough so that we work towards it. Thank you. So from my vision statement, I identified 6 main priorities, key priorities, and you will see that I've coupled strategic priorities and functions because the priorities basically encapsulates the functions of the Commission. The Act is very, very clear that we need to promote and protect children's rights across the province. So this includes monitoring, the services and implementation of legislation. It's also about conducting, from a commissioner point of view, own investigation and inquiries, if resources allows it. But I think that's a very, very important point for me. And advocate for improved government responsiveness and strategic reform. I think within the Western Cape, there's working previously for Department of Social Development. I think there's a high responsive rate, but I think that can be improved. And we need to start working interdepartmentally. And I think the commissioner must, guide that particular process. And especially colleagues, and you will hear this a lot, having, experience in working in rural communities, the voice must count. And also your township communities. The heart of, I think, the commissioner is child participation, and it's very important that we amplify and build on what the current commissioner have laid, very, very solid foundation with regard to this. So under this particular strategic priority, I would like to expand and strengthen the child government monitors structures. And have it across all the regions in the Western Cape. Again, it's important that we have inclusive practice. Yeah, I think you moved now. No. It's fine for me. That's the essence what I explained now under strategic priority number 2. Strategic priority number 3. Building, cross-sector collaboration for child-centered governance. So here we need to continue to build, and I think, the current commissioner started to build very solid relationships with the 4 departments. So that is social development, health and wellness, DCAS, and which is the other one now. It's sorry, it's DCAS, social development, health and wellness, and education. Yeah, how can I forget education? So yes, we need to strengthen that. I think collaboration is so important, but within the collaboration, how do we foster also the understanding that I'm still an independent body, that I must function like any other Chapter 9 institution within the country, and I think that can be a very difficult, task to do, but it's very important when we build this partnership that we have a clear terms of reference, so that the other partners can understand what is my duty. Also, I think it's very important under this particular strategic priority that the commissioner must support, and coordinate planning when it comes to service delivery, especially in your priority areas like child safety within this particular province, especially children on the Cape Flats, the mental health issue within the Department of Education, but even broader than the Department of Education. Education inclusion, this is a very, very, very sensitive topic, I think, especially, each year between January and March. It's very, very important. So how do we create almost like a whole of society approach when we deal with children registrations, and obviously early childhood development? I think I spoke already, to strategic priority number 4 in terms of the equity and inclusion, and you can continue. And then strengthening institutional capacity and sustainability. Chairperson, I was, quite when I went through, the annual reports, it was very evident that the commissioner is struggling with human resources. And my question was, how did the commissioner even survive the past 5 years without the resources? But it's very important, that would be a priority for me to lobby and secure permanent office space. That is a challenge, and I know there are, engagements, and they said last year already that it might take 2 years. To make the office space, suitable. But the permanent office space deals also with access. It deals also with the type of work culture that you create within the commission. So that is important for sustainability. And then also what I've picked up in the last annual report is that there's a lot of human resources allocated to the education and support branch. But there's very little, allocated into the investigation and advice branch. So the commissioner has a mandate in terms of monitoring, investigating, and advising. So that's quite important. So I would, when I saw that, I would like to know how is the investigations then taking place from a commissioner's office point of view. And then also, to implement, administrative systems to track complaints and referrals. But I want to even take it further. I know that the commissioner actually did a quite good job, with this particular system. But I think what we need to have, a chairperson and committee members, we need to have almost like a central database where all 4 key departments can access that. And to give almost like, editing rights to the office of the HODs of those departments, so that we all can track it and keep each other accountable.
Just want to say we do need to start finishing up with the presentation because we have to get to the questions.
All right, thank you very much. Then obviously continue with raising awareness and building a culture of rights. Here again, colleagues, we need to look at, how do we really involve our local communities, because that is where we move to sustainable interventions. You can continue. So as I alluded earlier, I think, the quality, and I'm going to run through this, is to remain independent, have high integrity. That is quite important in this position. You need to have, a sense of strategic thinking. So how do you formulate and lead long-term strategies for change? Child participation, because that's the heart of the work of the commissioner. So you need to have a deep commitment, to children's agency and participation. And this is what the current commissioner did quite well. Leadership and governance. I think it's very important that we must manage a multidisciplinary team. That person must have that quality, and also a solid understanding with regard to your public accountability, governance, and also fiduciary responsibilities. Stakeholder collaboration. I've alluded to this earlier. Professional experience, understanding the Act, really implementing the Act. That's quite important, and also appreciation for diversity, because we work with an inclusive society. Key competencies, colleagues. I think obviously you would agree with me. Comprehensive knowledge in terms of international and national legal instruments, and I've mentioned some of those instruments earlier. The ability to interpret, apply, legislation. So again, with my background, I can interpret a legislation. I can apply it. I did apply it. I did apply it in the Western Cape context. So I know exactly how difficult it sometimes can be. But it's all about the best interest of the child, as articulated in Section 10 of the Children's Act. You must be skilled in public speaking, because you're going to, address the committee very often, but also the public. And the ability to facilitate, child-friendly consultations. Again, it's very commendable what the current commissioner did. Also very, you must be skilled and almost like you have a diplomatic approach towards stakeholders, because you work not only with government partners, but also with your NGO partners and with institutions of higher learning. and you must be competent in terms of child law, human rights, or social work. So my core strategies, I think, to build on the legacy, it's very important, colleagues, and I say this with respect, that the first 5 years was laying a foundation. The next 5 years must build on that foundation. You can't have radical change, to what the commissioner already put in place. Otherwise, it will not sustain. So it's very important for me that we facilitate ongoing capacity, the building of the structures the commission put in place, lobby for more posts, especially under the investigation and advice directorate or subdirectorate. Also, what I pick up here, a chairperson, is that we do not have an interdisciplinary. We have. I'm not even sure now. I know there's staff, with development studies, political science, psychology in the commission. But one would definitely, to deal with complex cases, to establish an ad hoc interdisciplinary committee, and that can consist of experts outside the 4 departments you have oversight over. So that's very important. And then also, I think, to strengthen institutional partnerships, I would definitely launch a Western Cape Commissioner for Children Forum. And this will consist of your 4 key departments, your non-profit organizations, and definitely your institutions of higher learning. And I spoke about, the online, referral system. I would like to see, advocate for a whole of society approach when it comes to placement challenges of learners, but also mental health challenges amongst learners. And also advocate for the facilitation of community-led, child protection and well-being programs. You can continue. And there I just, made a few comments there. I think at the next stage, 5-year strategic, period, very important, certain sections in terms of the act is quite vague. So I think, one needs to move to the next stage and see how do we, develop regulations for the act. And this may include, it's, describing minimum standards for how a commissioner must ensure meaningful child participation. Now, although the Children's Act is also not giving that particular guide, but here again, when you have people, in your interdisciplinary committee, they can, for example, assist with drafting, these guides, obviously, and then also looking at a mandatory reporting template to ensure that we have at least minimum content that speaks to the annual report of the commission and how does it align with international standards. For example, your national development plan priorities and also SDGs. And looking especially, and I'm going to end here because of time, looking at the statutory powers during investigation. That is not very clear, Madam Chair, because, the issue around can the commissioner subpoena someone to say, look, I need more information about this case. What are the timelines? How do we, for example, give feedback to a complainant? Because ultimately we want to be responsive and the commissioner must be accountable. So those are just, inputs from my side in terms of what I would like to see within the next 5 years happening within the sector. Thank you very much, Chair and Committee.
Thank you very much. Right, on to our questions. Our first question is from Member Heron.
First question is, what value does your previous job experience add?
From a non-profit organization point of view, Bedisa in Beaufort West, Lugamka. And also I've worked in Drakenstein, Paul, focusing on Hermon, Saron, Gouda, and the Hillcrest areas. I've implemented the act. I have, supervised the act. I have that is my social work background. I also worked in the Child and Youth Care Center. How do we capture those voices as well? So I mean, I'm not going to go through my CV now. I mean, you chairperson and the committee has access to that. But I think, working with the Children's Act, working with strategic partners within the sector, coming from the Department of Social Development, having a good relationship with the Department of Social Development. I hope they think also that they have one with me. But I know we have a very good relationship because we also work, in partnership where I'm at the university. So it brings a lot of value. Understanding, interpreting court orders, looking at the Children's Act, looking at the gaps, making key recommendations, co-creating programs with communities. That's important. So I can walk the talk. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Member Philanda.
Thank you very much, Chair, Mr. Smith. What are the three biggest challenges that children are faced with in the Western Cape? And how will you, as the Commissioner for Children, approach those issues? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Member. Chairperson, there are, according to me, the three biggest. Number one is the income poverty. It is poverty. Number two, especially on the Cape Flats part, is they are victims of direct crime and violence, but also indirect victims. Number four is, and this goes with the poverty, is the food insecurity in the province. Now, as a commissioner, the legal mandate of the commission is very clear, is to oversee, to monitor services, to make recommendations to the committee, to the premier. But it comes in here, how do we foster partnerships? How do we understand this particular phenomenon that we are dealing with? And who do we bring on board as part of the multidisciplinary team to look at this? Because as a commissioner, knowing the challenge of the human resource element, it's very difficult, to say, but the commissioner must do X, Y, and Z intervention. But to say, okay, bring in the experts, let's look at the priorities, let's look at these concerns, and let's come up with an action plan in partnership, in co-creation spirit with the community, with the voice of the children, and then we move. So you will see that I come with a partnership approach, understanding my role, but also the act is very clear in terms of lobbying, educating, advocating, and building, institutional partners. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Member Syed.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thank you for your responses, Mr. Smith. How do you propose to translate the identified community concerns into practical solutions within the constraints of limited resources? Very briefly, thank you.
So that's a very loaded question, Honourable. May I ask you to just report? I just want to write the keywords.
Okay.
My apology, Chair.
Okay. How do you propose to translate identified community concerns into practical solutions within the constraints of limited resources? Is that clear?
Thank you very much. Thank you. So again, yeah, I think, working with your 4 departments, especially if you speak about community related issues. So the department that is working within the communities within its mandate is the Department of Social Development. So the Department of Social Development has social workers and community development practitioners. So according to the norms and standards of community development practitioners, they must do community profiles. So it's very important to access those information, but also, Department of Local Government, they also do community. So to have them and identify with the community and with children, these concerns. Now, what we do wrong in government, and I say this out of experience, is that we never move to the phase where we plan with the community. So how do we address it? How do we address these concerns? Because interventions must be context specific. It must be, community based. It must be community context specific. So my approach would be to approach the Department of Social Development, be part of that particular local engagements, look at community profiles, look at what the CDWs at Department of Government, local government, are saying and picking up. And that, what comes from those dialogues must then translate into practical interventions. It's very difficult as I think as a commissioner's office to say, look, the commissioner, yes, the commissioner with the community, recommends this particular intervention, but strong focus on community-led interventions. The community identify, the community is leading. We as government departments must have a facilitation and education role, and the commissioner must have a monitoring role with regard to that particular service delivery mandate. Thank you, Chair. I hope I've answered the question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And it is Member Stevens' turn.
Thank you, Chair. Given that monitoring and reporting are the aspects of the Commissioner, how would you go about in raising awareness to the departments and executive? And what monitoring tools will be implemented? How would you manage a situation where government departments or the executive do not want to cooperate with the Office of the Commissioner? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. Chairperson, I think there are two questions from that one question is with regard to the monitoring tools. So I think, each department has its own internal monitoring tools and systems already in place. They report on a quarterly basis what they call, the APP indicators. So they report on that, and they report that to the Department of Premier. So already I have access as a commissioner to those information because it speaks to child protection, for example. It speaks to children, that are placed in alternative care. So there's a number of APP indicators which one can access. One would want to move, I think, to like I said, a central database where this is reported. And I think, if you look at the roles of the commissioner, I think, it speaks about promoting and protecting best interest. So what does that mean? So there must be indicators for the commissioner, to really report on that, to come and report to the standing committee. Also, it speaks about, protection of children. So DSD is very clear with regard to that. I think what is lacking is to have indicators that speaks to participation, speaks about education from a commissioner point of view. Now, the four departments will obviously indicate, we already have a lot of things to report, and they don't want to report additionally. But some information can be attracted from information reported to the Department of Premier. And some information, they need to, report directly to the Commission with regard to what I've highlighted now. And those are, those can be online, data systems that we can have to make it easy accessible. It's a live system. We can see it. We can see the impact. No cooperation. I didn't pick that up when I was working for almost 10 years at, in government. There's always cooperation. There's always a fight about whose mandate is it. But, there's very little. But, to set up a meeting, this is always my approach, to set up a meeting with the HOD and the chief directors to explain why this is needed, because I have a legal mandate to do that. And if that doesn't work, to make a recommendation to the standing committee to deal with that. Because the commissioner must enforce its legal powers and duties. That is very much highlighted in Chapter 3 of the Act. But my approach is always to have a meeting to say, okay, how do we lessen the frustration amongst partners, but at the very same time, get the information done? Because part of the legal mandate is to monitor the services, and it's very important that we look at what services and why do we need the information, because we want to show impact and I think footprint to the standing committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Member van Wyk.
How would you ensure that the Children's Act is being implemented on the ground to benefit children? And then to perhaps a practical example.
Okay. Thank you. I think as part of my plan, my proposed strategy is to have those institutional forum engagements where the 4 departments will definitely, serve on. And the department can choose who it will, send to represent the department. But there, we will have a standard reporting in terms of how the act is implemented. I think, we must actually have regular, meetings with the Department of Social Development, because the Department of Social Development is the custodian of the Children's Act. So I need to monitor that through the complaints. The Department of Social Development must implement the Act because they have the powers in terms of the Act. The HOD actually has the powers, and those powers are transferred to your social workers. And then through the complaints to say, okay, but here's a loophole. How do we strengthen that? How do we make recommendations to the HOD, but also to the standing committee? So more oversight role, and we need to have regular engagements with the department, regular engagements in terms of forum institutional engagement, so that we can see where are the challenges when it comes to the implementation of the Children's Act, but also where are the successes, because I think there's a lot of successes. We tend to only focus on the needs and the concerns, but I think from a strength-based approach, or what they call the asset-based approach, there's a lot of good things. So we must have a look at both. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Member Walters.
How would you defend the integrity of the Children's Commissioner, and how would you protect the functional independence of the Commissioner?
Thank you very much, Member. When I prepared, that was actually also my biggest concern, because it's the very first, it's the only commission in the country. It's new. For years, we've operated, that there's one department that deals with children, and the others like education, health and wellness, and etc. They have, in terms of the Act, Children's Act, not a lot of, statutory powers. I think it's important, based on my qualities that I have signaled in my presentation, to remain independent, to remain, as much as we need to build partnerships. And I want to emphasize this. We must build partnerships. We must collaborate. But it's very clear in terms of developing MOUs, terms of reference document, where the powers within that partnership of the commissioner is highlighted, so that other partners can't say, but this is not good partnership, this is not in good faith. So the first thing that I would recommend in building partnerships is to have the terms of reference document. This will obviously go through the DG of the province, and also where you deal with higher education and learning, those are MOUs that will also go through the DG. So the functions are encapsulated in those agreements and MOUs. I think one must be very mindful as a commissioner about I always say to students, everything in South Africa, everything is political. Politics is in the order of the day. It controls the narrative, it controls who is appointed, not appointed, and etc. So it's very important that the commissioner remain mindful about these dynamics. And somehow, when those dynamics comes up, for example, make a very clear decision in consultation with your multidisciplinary team. Because the commissioner can get highly sometimes involved in fights within a community. And those community fights are sometimes driven by political agendas. But to bring it back to a multidisciplinary team that's objective and then take advice from them, because that's important. Hence my suggestion to establish multidisciplinary team that can remain objective and protect the integrity of the commission's office. I hope I answered your question. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Member Heron.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The seventh question has two parts. I think you've already probably answered one part around child government monitors, but I'll pose the two questions to you. The first is, as Commissioner for Children, how do you view the child monitor program? If you were to change it, how would you involve child government monitors and children sectors? And then the second part of the question, how will you ensure that initiatives like the child government monitors incorporate children's voices and their perspectives are integrated into your work and decision-making processes on a municipal and government level?
Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Member. Chairperson, like I said earlier in my presentation, I think, this is very important structures within the local communities. It brings child participation to the commission. It speaks to child agency, and that's important. It's one of the qualities I believe that the commissioner must appreciate: child agency and child participation. So for now, being the first 5 years, I think this was a quite good initiative, and one should actually just strengthen and continue with the capacitation of these committees. What I would like to see, and I'm not sure if that is the case, but to have it structured and established across all the regions in the province. So that includes your rural areas, it includes your township communities, it includes your metro communities, to have a holistic voice and provide everyone the opportunity to participate and to thrive. That's the one. And in terms of, I think through those workshops, and one must have regular workshops, and even on the forum, for example, there must be, for example, your advisory committees that flows from the child monitor, the CGMs. They must serve on the forum engagement to have a child voice there. Number one, that is the first thing. The second thing is that these workshops are so important because the work is captured and it flows directly into, for example, the annual report, into the strategic planning, into, if we, for example, say implementation plans of the commissioner. So these structures must only be, for now, supported, more capacitated, more workshops, knowing that the budget might be a concern, to capture the voice of the children. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Member Kaiser Flanders.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Smith, given the high levels of child trafficking in the Western Cape, how would you propose that the Office of the Commissioner for Children would seek to address that issue? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think what the commissioner, in terms of the legislative mandate of the commissioner, is to track those services and also to educate its main beneficiary or service user with regard to child trafficking. So education, tracking, monitoring, and then reporting. But also, and this is again why I think there must be more meetings with the Department of Social Development, because again, according to the Children's Act, that is a mandate of DSD, but there's also an act that deals with human trafficking, that also put a lot of weight on DSD. So there you can see already forming a solid partnership with the Department of Social Development is crucial. because those, child protection concerns falls under them. But how do we support them in the awareness and education role that we can do? But I also have at the very same time, as a commissioner, then have monitor and oversee that particular service. So again, terms of reference document, MOUs with the department, quite important. So that we understand this is my role, this is where I can support, but this is where I need to keep you accountable. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Then the end is in sight. Question 9 from member Sayed.
Thank you very much. The second last question. What steps would you take as the Commissioner for Children to address the lack of forensic support in sexual and child abuse cases? And can you provide an example of similar initiatives which you've led or which you've supported in the past to improve response and support for victims?
Yeah, no, I'm thinking, it's very interesting, and when I worked at the Department of Social Development, especially during my time working at the provincial office doing monitoring evaluation. So we worked a lot with, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with it, with the TCCs, the Tutuzela Care Centers. So I think, again, that is initiative, geared by NPA. So very much important that we establish a partnership with them. The Western Cape Constitution, and sorry if I may sound that I'm jumping around in my answers, but I want to give context. The Constitution of the Western Cape give oversight function over 4 departments, which are already now established. But it doesn't mean, because the issues around children are more complex and integrated. So it doesn't mean that the commissioner must only focus on those 4. Although the commissioner don't have legal mandate over NPA in the Department of Justice, it's very clear of the last annual report that the commissioner must have relationships with the Department of Justice. And again, with this question raises again the issue of how do we, for example, set up, bilateral meetings with NPA, and how do we then incorporate their work into the awareness and education programs, because that is important. And why do we say so? Because so that children and so that the parents can keep the TCCs also responsible in terms of what must happen when, because that particular model offers holistic services to sexual offenders. So that is in terms of in terms of education, bilateral meetings, and incorporate that into our work. And then, I myself, was a social worker, but our function, and you will hear the Department of Social Development would say, our function is first psychosocial support. Number 2 is providing protection if needed. Especially when the child is now being released from the TCC. And so I was involved more from an operational point of view, but also from a capacity building point of view and monitoring evaluation point of view, when we monitored non-profit organizations who was responsible for working in the TCC, but in terms of rendering psychosocial support services. So that is my involvement, and that is what I think the commissioner's office must do in terms of tightening the partnership with them, and then see what we can bring in or draw from them, and translate it into educational sessions when we do awareness and education and support in the different communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the final question is from member Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. How would advocate and support children with special needs to access education so they can live a meaningful post-school life?
Can you repeat that question again? Sorry.
No problem. How would advocate and support children with special needs to access education so they can live a meaningful post in school life? Thank you.
Yeah, that is I think that is one of the where the inclusion exclusion comes in very strongly. I think the Constitution of South Africa is very clear in terms of Section 29. Um, Everyone has the right to education. Section 28 of the Act also speaks to that. Of the Constitution. Then obviously the Children's Act speak to that. So those are the legislative frameworks that one can use to enforce access. With regard to what we call articulation from primary and secondary school to your post-schooling, that is where we need to have serious engagements, I think, with the Department of Higher Education. Although I think a lot has changed in that particular landscape, you see more and more, children with disabilities accessing that. There are, specialized services at universities. So very much important, and I say this with mindfulness, in terms of human resources at the Commission's office, but to engage, for example, with your three main universities and also your TVET colleges, because so that those information can also form part when we do education. So hence again, my partnership, and I want to emphasize this with higher education, higher learning education institutions. It's very, very important, because how do we create a articulation from secondary school to access those particular opportunities? So all children must thrive. And I think, the commissioner can enforce those particular, through the powers, through the chapter 3 of the act. The constitution is very clear, but to have, for example, that designated meetings, and they form part of the forum, so that we can see what can we really bring in, and what can we refer, what can be done by DSD, by Department of Western Cape Basic Education, because the mandates are there, but the commissioner must see how best it can support, protect, and enhance, promote the interest of these children. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. That completes the questions. As you know, the names were advertised. We have not received any objections, so we don't have to discuss anything along those lines. And that is it. What will happen with the committee is we will obviously complete our interviews tomorrow, and then we will deliberate. So you will find out in the next couple of weeks. We will let you know. So thank you very, very much, and I appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, for the opportunity, and good luck with the rest of the interviews. Thanks.
Thank you.